A baby comes into this world unlike any other baby has before. For the first time, doctors in Ukraine used a new type of three-parent IVF technique so that a previously infertile couple could have a child. To clarify, this isn't the first child born with DNA of three parents, but she was the first to be conceived using a technique called pronuclear transfer. In this instance, doctors in Kiev combined the father's sperm with the mother's egg and then placed those genes into an egg that was donated by another woman. Then they implanted that egg in the mother's womb, and on January 5th, she gave birth naturally to a baby girl. The baby has her parents' genetic identity with a trace amount of DNA from the donor woman. But her conception is controversial. For one, the science of three-parent IVF is new and still highly experimental. It also raises a number of ethical concerns and fears over the possibility of a future with so-called designer babies.
A new report estimates that 8 billionaires own the same wealth as half the world's population. The Oxfam report was released on Monday, January 16th, during the annual World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Including 6 Americans, the 8 richest people in the world are worth $426 billion. The report estimated the world's poorest 3.7 billion people together own about $17 billion less than that amount. Oxfam CEO Mark Goldring called this view of world inequality, quote, beyond grotesque. He added, quote, while 1 in 9 people on the planet will go to bed hungry tonight, a small handful of billionaires have so much wealth they would need several lifetimes to spend it. The billionaires are Microsoft's Bill Gates, Zara's Monaco Ortega, investor Warren Buffett, Mexican tycoon Carlos Slim Helú, Amazon's Jeff Bezos, Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, Oracle's Larry Ellison, and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg.
This week at the United Nations, humanitarian officers turned their attention to the ongoing food shortage in Somalia. The dire situation there affected about 40% of the country's population. Woo Se-young files us this report.
The United Nations says 5 million people in Somalia, that's 40% of the population, don't have enough to eat. The prolonged drought across the country has worsened the already precarious food supply, according to a report released by the UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs. Among the millions requiring food aid, some 820,000 are in dire need of humanitarian support.
We don't have food, water, nor clothes. Our farms are barren, our livestock are dead, and our men cannot find any work to do. I lost my son because I couldn't find any food or water to give him, and now another one is also in hospital. I also lost 12 members of my family. We're in so much despair. This morning we did not cook anything because I have nothing to feed my children. They're here crying. We urgently need food, water, and medicine.
Tanzania's government has denied that dry weather is responsible for a food crisis in the country. Instead, the Agriculture Department says producers are stockpiling supplies to drive up prices. The opposition has, in the meantime, threatened to bring a motion of no confidence before Parliament against President John Magufuli should any Tanzanian die of hunger. Lucy Taylor gives us this update from Dar es Salaam.
Over the past few days, some newspapers have carried reports of families being forced to survive on just one meal a day because their crops have failed. Religious leaders, including the National Muslim Council and the Catholic Church, have asked their followers to pray for rain. And one opposition leader has even threatened to bring a motion of no confidence against the president if people die of hunger. But now the government has responded to say there is no food crisis in Tanzania. The Minister of Agriculture, Charles Tibiza, said the country has enough food for everyone. He admitted there have been lower than average harvests in 43 districts, which could lead to food shortages in places. Some countries in southern Africa have had severe food shortages over the past year because of one of the worst droughts in decades. And the minister suggested that demand from those countries could be part of what's driving up prices here. He also accused some producers of stockpiling food supplies to increase prices.
Now, Saudi Arabia's drawn-out war against Yemen has pushed the country to the brink of catastrophe, and more civilians are now losing their lives by the day in airstrikes that often target residential areas. As well, food and medication also very scarce. At a press conference in Sana'a, the UN humanitarian coordinator has spoken out about the situation in Yemen. Here's our Mohammed Al-Attab with your details.
Jamie Magdalurk, UN humanitarian coordinator, held a press conference at the United Nations headquarters in Sana'a on Monday, answering questions about the impacts of almost 2 years of war on the country's humanitarian situation. The facts he presented were grim. Over 14 million people are food insecure and in need of basic health care. Mr. Magdalurk also blamed the conflict for a sharp increase in malnutrition rates among children.
To the index tonight, raw nerves across central Italy. 4 strong earthquakes hitting the region within several hours, all 4 of magnitude 5.1 or greater.
3 earthquakes hit central Italy in the space of an hour on Wednesday, shaking the same region that suffered a series of deadly quakes last year. There were no immediate reports of casualties, but tremors were felt as far away as Rome, where the subway was closed as a precaution and parents were asked to collect their children from schools. All 3 quakes had a magnitude of over 5 on the Richter scale. The mountainous Amatrice region was shaken by 3 tremors last year, killing nearly 300 people and causing significant damage to older buildings.
Breaking news coming to us now from Italy. At least 30 people have been found dead at a hotel that was destroyed by an avalanche. It happened after an earthquake hit the area. This was after actually several earthquakes measuring between 5 and 6.5 on the Richter scale hit the area. However, when this does happen in winter, snow buildup can threaten avalanches. We've been hearing about a few occurring, and it's just now being realized that dozens have actually died in one of these avalanches in central Italy. We'll be covering that story as it develops. We'll bring you more details on how rescue and recovery operations are proceeding.
A giant crack in an Antarctic ice shelf forces a group of researchers to evacuate a polar research base. The British Antarctic Society is bringing home a group of almost 90 scientists from the Halley 6 Polar Research Base. A crack in the Brunt ice shelf has been growing about 1 mile every year since 2012 and passes just 10 miles from the base. The crack in the ice is already 1/3 of a mile deep and as wide as 25 highway lanes. Officials are worried that an iceberg could break away from the larger ice shelf, although the chances of this happening are low and the evacuation of the base is a precautionary measure. Researchers have been removed from the base ahead of the Antarctic winter, which brings on 24-hour darkness, extreme cold, and freezing ocean waters, all conditions that would make rescue efforts nearly impossible.
Authorities announced Monday that dozens of false killer whales, which belong to the dolphin family, were found stranded in Florida. Everglades National Park posted on Facebook, a pod of 95 false killer whales have stranded on the Gulf Coast of Everglades National Park, just north of Highland Beach. Sadly, 81 have already been confirmed dead. Marine mammals rescue operations are underway with our partners. Authorities are investigating and have responded to the scene, but a stranding coordinator with National Marine Fisheries Service told the Miami Herald the animals were deeply embedded in some of the mangroves, making response efforts extremely difficult. WFTV notes false killer whales are named for their resemblance to orcas. They are members of the dolphin family and range in size from 15 feet to 20 feet. While the cause for this stranding is unknown at the time, a NOAA Fisheries webpage cites possible reasons why marine mammals strand, and among those include disease, parasite infestation, and trauma.
Korea's southern Jeju Island has confirmed its first case of avian influenza since the worst bird flu outbreak to hit the country broke out about 2 months ago. The Agriculture Ministry said on Saturday that the highly pathogenic H5N6 strain of the virus was detected in dead ducks found at the Hwangsu Reservoir in Jeju City on Monday. Special preventative measures have been put in place within a 10-kilometer radius of where the ducks were found. The area covers around some 30 farms that raise around 400,000 chickens. Orders for poultry to be culled have not yet been issued, though. Over 30 million chickens and other birds have been culled so far nationwide as a result of Korea's worst ever outbreak of AI.
Hundreds of domestic cats have been quarantined in New York City after contracting a strain of highly contagious avian flu at shelters operated by a major animal rescue organization. According to Reuters, officials say the virus has also infected at least one veterinarian. More than 450 cats will remain at a temporary shelter for up to 90 days until a University of Wisconsin lab confirms they are no longer contagious.
Highly experimental. It also raises a number of ethical concerns and fears over the possibility of a future with so-called designer babies.
A new report estimates that 8 billionaires own the same
of 3 parents, but she was the first to be conceived using a technique called pro-nuclear transfer. In this instance, doctors in Kiev combined the father's sperm with the mother's egg and then placed those genes into an egg that was donated by another woman. Then they implanted that egg, and a baby comes into this world unlike any other baby has before. For the first time, doctors in Ukraine used a new type of 3-parent IVF technique so that a previously infertile couple could have a child. To clarify, this isn't the first child born with DNA in the mother's womb, and on January 5th, she gave birth naturally to a baby girl. The baby has her parents' genetic identity with a trace amount of DNA from the donor woman. But her conception is controversial. For one, the science of 3-parent IVF is new and still